Tom Mitchell's weathered hands froze mid-reach toward the rifle barrel, his 67-year-old body trembling as he stared into the wild eyes of the man holding it. The bitter October wind carried the desperate whimpers of Luna, the pregnant black bear writhing in agony just 20 feet behind him. "You killed my mother, old man." The gunman's voice cracked with 27 years of buried rage. "Now I'm gonna kill yours." The small crowd of mourning hikers gasped, children pressing their faces against their parents' legs as cell phones began recording the unthinkable scene. An elderly woman clutched her husband's arm, her whispered prayer barely audible above Luna's increasingly frantic cries. Tom's mind raced between the dying bear who had somehow recognized him after 2 decades and the stranger whose eyes held a haunting familiarity. Margaret's voice echoed in his memory. "Animals understand grief better than people, Tommy." "Bobby, please." Tom's voice broke as recognition dawned. What had brought his long-lost son to this moment? And how many lives hung in the balance of the next 30 seconds? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, Tom Mitchell had awakened to the familiar ache of loneliness that settled deeper into his bones with each passing day. The single-wide trailer felt cavernous without Margaret's gentle humming drifting from the kitchen, without her soft footsteps padding across the worn linoleum floors. He reached instinctively for her pillow, fingers finding only cold cotton that still held the faintest trace of her lavender perfume. The morning ritual never changed. Black coffee in Margaret's favorite mug, the one with the faded "World's Best Wife" printed in cheerful yellow letters. Toast with strawberry jam, eaten standing at the kitchen window overlooking the Shenandoah Valley. The unopened letter from Sarah sat propped against the sugar bowl, her handwriting as familiar as his own heartbeat, yet he couldn't bring himself to break the seal. 2 years of silence stretched between them like an unbridgeable chasm, carved deeper by grief and misunderstanding. His Social Security check of $1,200 barely covered the trailer rent and utilities, leaving little for luxuries like the heart medication Dr. Peterson kept prescribing. The house, their real home where Sarah had taken her first steps, where Margaret had planted rose bushes that bloomed faithfully every spring, had been sold to pay for Margaret's final months at the memory care facility. Tom had watched his wife slip away piece by piece, her brilliant mind dissolving like sugar in rain, until she no longer recognized the man who had loved her for 43 years. The diagnosis had come quietly, delivered in Dr. Peterson's sterile office with the clinical detachment of someone who had given such news 1,000 times before. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 3 to 6 months, maybe less. Tom had nodded, folded the paperwork carefully, and driven straight to the Shenandoah Wildlife Preserve where he'd been volunteering since Margaret's death. The animals didn't judge his tears or demand explanations for his silences. Sarah lived 3,000 miles away in San Diego now, building a life with her husband Miguel and 6-year-old Emma, Tom's granddaughter, whom he'd seen only in photographs tucked inside Christmas cards. The rift had opened during Margaret's illness, when Sarah accused him of not visiting enough, of not fighting harder for experimental treatments, of giving up. She couldn't understand that he had visited every single day, that he had held Margaret's hand through every doctor's appointment, that sometimes love meant letting go. The preserve became his sanctuary, the only place where his military veterinary training still felt useful. He knew every trail, every den, every watering hole where the black bears congregated. The park rangers trusted his expertise, often calling when injured wildlife needed assessment. It was honest work that paid nothing but gave him purpose in a world that seemed determined to strip away everything he'd once held dear. Margaret's voice still echoed in quiet moments. "Your mother always said animals understand grief better than people, Tommy." She had been right, as she so often was. The bears, the deer, the countless creatures he'd helped heal, They accepted his presence without question, without judgment, without the complicated weight of human disappointment. The October morning had started like any other, with Tom's beat-up Ford pickup rumbling down the gravel road toward the preserve's eastern entrance. The autumn air carried the crisp promise of winter, and the maples blazed scarlet against the pale sky. He'd planned to check the water stations near Bear Creek, a routine task that usually brought him peace. Instead, he found Luna. She lay sprawled beneath a cluster of oak trees, her massive frame heaving with labored breaths. Even from 50 yards away, Tom could see the telltale signs of distress, the way she panted with her tongue lolling, the restless shifting of her hindquarters, the low moans that carried on the morning breeze. His trained eye immediately recognized what was happening. She was in labor, but something was terribly wrong. As Tom approached cautiously, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening, Luna's head lifted. Her dark eyes met his, and in that moment, recognition flickered between them like an electric current. The distinctive white patch on her chest, the peculiar way her left ear folded at the tip, and most telling of all, the faded scar running along her left front paw. This was the same bear cub he had treated 20 years ago, when he was still the preserve's official veterinarian, when Margaret was alive and Sarah still called him every Sunday. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom whispered, his voice catching with emotion. "Luna girl, is that really you?" The memory flooded back with startling clarity. A terrified 6-month-old cub caught in an illegal steel trap, her tiny paw mangled and infected. Tom had spent 3 days and nights nursing her back to health in the preserve's medical facility, bottle feeding her, cleaning her wounds, teaching her to trust human hands again. Margaret had even helped, bringing fresh salmon from the market and staying up late to monitor the cub's recovery. When they finally released her back into the wild, Margaret had christened her Luna because of the crescent-shaped marking on her forehead. Now, 2 decades later, Luna was dying. Tom's military medic training kicked in as he assessed the situation. She was clearly in the late stages of labor, but the birthing process had stalled. Her breathing was becoming increasingly shallow, and a concerning amount of blood stained the ground beneath her. Without immediate intervention, both mother and cubs would be lost within the hour. He reached for his cell phone to call the preserve's emergency veterinary service, then remembered with crushing disappointment that Dr. Williams was attending a conference in Richmond. The nearest qualified vet was over an hour away, and Luna didn't have that kind of time. Tom's hands trembled as he scrolled through his contacts, knowing that his own medical license had expired years ago, that he was legally powerless to provide the help Luna desperately needed. That's when he heard the footsteps behind him. "Step away from the bear, old man." Tom turned slowly, his heart sinking as he saw the hunting rifle pointed directly at his chest. The man holding it was perhaps 45, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of lean build that spoke of hard living. His camouflage jacket was well worn, and his boots were caked with mud from trekking through the forest. But it was his eyes that stopped Tom cold. Pale blue eyes filled with a hatred so intense it felt like a physical blow. "Now, I don't want to hurt you," the gunman continued, his voice steady despite the weapon in his hands. "But that bear there is worth $15,000 on the black market. Gallbladder, paws, bile, there's folks in China who'll pay top dollar for fresh parts." "You can't be serious," Tom managed, his throat dry as dust. "She's giving birth. She's protected by federal law." The man's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Federal law don't pay for my mama's cancer treatments, old man. Federal law don't keep the lights on when Social Security runs out. That bear's been living high on the hog while real people suffer." Luna's distressed moaning grew louder, more desperate, and Tom could see her strength fading with each labored breath. The ethical weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. Here was a creature who had trusted him decades ago, who had somehow found him again in her moment of greatest need, and he was powerless to help her while a stranger with a rifle debated her worth in dollars and cents. "Please," Tom said quietly, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Just give me 10 minutes to help her." "The cubs will die if—" "The cubs will die anyway," the gunman interrupted. "At least this way, their death serves a purpose." As if responding to the threat, Luna struggled to lift her head, her eyes finding Tom's across the small clearing. In that gaze, he saw not just pain and fear, but something that looked remarkably like hope, the same trust she had shown him all those years ago when she was nothing more than a terrified, injured cub. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the trees, while 3 lives hung in the balance of a single, impossible decision. The gunman shifted his weight, and something about the movement triggered a memory in Tom's mind, the way he favored his left foot, the distinctive tilt of his head when concentrating. Tom had seen that stance before, somewhere in the fog of his past, but the recognition remained just out of reach. "You know what your problem is, old man?" the stranger said, his rifle never wavering. "You think every creature deserves saving. Well, let me tell you something about the real world. Sometimes good things die so better things can live." Luna's breathing became more labored, and Tom could see her strength ebbing like water from a cracked vessel. The professional in him knew exactly what needed to be done: manual repositioning of the breech cub, possibly an emergency C-section if complications arose. But with 20 feet of open ground and a rifle between him and Luna, his medical knowledge felt as useless as a prayer in a thunderstorm. "Look," Tom said carefully, keeping his voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I understand you're desperate. Money troubles, medical bills. I've been there myself. But killing her won't solve your problems." The gunman's face darkened. "Don't you dare pretend to understand my problems. You don't know what it's like to watch someone you love waste away while you count pennies for pain medication." The bitterness in his voice struck Tom like a physical blow. There was something deeply personal in that pain, something that went beyond simple financial desperation. As Tom studied the man's features more carefully, fragments of memory began to coalesce. The shape of his jaw, the way his eyebrows drew together when angry, the small scar above his left eyebrow. "My mama worked 3 jobs to keep us fed," the gunman continued, his voice cracking slightly. "She cleaned offices at night, served coffee at the diner during the day, took in sewing on weekends. All because the man who got her pregnant disappeared the moment things got complicated." Tom's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. The scar above the eyebrow, he remembered now. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, who had fallen off his bicycle outside the rural clinic where Tom had worked briefly between his military service and his position at the preserve. The boy's mother, a young woman named Linda Morrison, had been too proud to accept charity but too poor to pay for proper medical care. Tom had stitched the wound for free, and Linda had looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something he had been too young and too focused on his career to recognize. "Billy?" Tom whispered, the name falling from his lips like a stone into still water. The gunman's rifle trembled in his hands. "Don't you dare call me that. You lost the right to use my name the day you walked out on us. Son, I never knew." "I'm not your son," Billy Morrison screamed, his composure finally cracking. "Your son would have had a father who stuck around. Your son would have grown up with birthday presents and bedtime stories and someone to teach him to throw a football. I grew up with welfare cheese and secondhand clothes and the sound of my mama crying herself to sleep every night." The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with devastating clarity. Linda Morrison, sweet, shy Linda, with her shy smile and her determination to make it on her own. Tom remembered their brief romance during his transition period, remembered how she had suddenly stopped returning his calls just before he received his orders for Vietnam. He had assumed she had found someone else, someone who could offer her stability instead of the uncertain life of a young veterinarian about to be deployed overseas. "Billy, your mother never told me she was pregnant," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I swear on Margaret's grave I never knew you existed until this moment." "Liar!" Billy's voice broke like a teenager's. "She wrote you letters. Dozens of them. You never answered a single one." Tom's mind raced through the chaos of 1975, his deployment to Vietnam, the hastily arranged mail forwarding that never quite worked properly, the months of combat that had consumed every waking moment. How many letters had been lost in the bureaucratic shuffle of military mail? How many desperate pleas from a young pregnant woman had ended up in some clerk's wastebasket? Luna's desperate cry broke through their confrontation, a sound so raw and primal that both men turned toward her instinctively. She was struggling to stand now, her massive frame shaking with the effort. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and ominous in the morning light. "She's hemorrhaging," Tom said urgently, his medical training overriding everything else. "Billy, please, whatever anger you have toward me, don't let it kill an innocent animal and her babies." "Her babies?" Billy laughed bitterly. "What about your baby, Tom? What about the kid who grew up wondering why his father didn't love him enough to stay?" The rifle swung back toward Tom, but something had changed in Billy's eyes. The pure hatred was still there, but it was mixed now with confusion, with the terrible possibility that his entire understanding of his life had been built on a foundation of lies. Luna collapsed completely, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Tom could see the crown of the first cub beginning to emerge, but the birthing process had clearly stalled. Without immediate intervention, all 3 lives would be lost within minutes. "I have to help her," Tom said quietly, taking a half step forward. "You can shoot me afterward if that's what you need to do. But first let me save them." For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, father and son stared at each other across 27 years of misunderstanding. Luna's labored breathing filled the silence between them, each exhale weaker than the last. Tom could see the internal war raging behind Billy's eyes, the little boy who had waited by the window for a father who never came battling against the man who was finally hearing a different version of his origin story. "You're lying," Billy said, but his voice lacked conviction. The rifle in his hands wavered slightly, no longer pointed directly at Tom's chest. "Mama said you knew. She said you chose your career over us." Tom took another careful step forward, his hands raised in surrender. "Son, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, I never received a single letter from your mother." The military mail system was chaos in '75. Half the guys in my unit never got their letters from home until months after they were written. Luna's cry of distress broke through their confrontation again, more desperate now. Tom could see the cub's head clearly visible, but the shoulders were stuck. Without immediate manual assistance, both mother and baby would die within minutes. His fingers twitched with the need to help, every instinct screaming at him to move. But Billy's rifle still commanded the space between them. "Mama used to read me the letters she wrote you," Billy continued, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Page after page, telling you about my first words, my first steps, how I looked just like you when I smiled. She'd sit at that old kitchen table every night, writing by lamplight because we couldn't afford decent electricity." The image cut through Tom like a blade. He could picture Linda Morrison, barely 22, pregnant and alone, pouring her heart onto paper that would never reach its intended destination. How many nights had she sat there waiting for a response that would never come? How many times had she checked the mailbox with hope that slowly curdled into bitterness? "I would have come back," Tom whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Billy, I would have married your mother. I would have been there for every birthday, every school play, every scraped knee. I loved her. I just didn't know. Stop! Billy's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare say you loved her when you let her die alone and bitter. Do you know what her last words were? Tell Tommy I never stopped waiting. She died waiting for a man who forgot she existed. The revelation hit Tom like a physical blow. Linda Morrison was dead, taking with her any chance of explaining the truth, of healing the wounds that had festered for nearly 3 decades. He thought of Margaret, of their quiet life together, of Sarah growing up knowing she was loved and wanted. All the while, somewhere in rural Virginia, a little boy was growing up believing his father had abandoned him by choice. Luna's breathing became more labored, pulling Tom's attention back to the immediate crisis. The cub was definitely stuck, and he could see signs of fetal distress. His military medic training kicked into overdrive, cataloging options and calculating risks. Manual repositioning was possible but dangerous. An emergency field cesarean would require tools he didn't have. But doing nothing guaranteed death for all 3 lives hanging in the balance. "Billy, I need you to listen to me," Tom said urgently, taking another step forward. "I know you hate me. I know you have every right to pull that trigger. But that bear trusted me once before, 20 years ago, when she was just a cub caught in a steel trap. She somehow found me again today, in her moment of greatest need. I can't let her down." 20 years ago? Billy's voice was sharp with sudden interest. Tom nodded, his eyes never leaving Luna's struggling form. She was barely 6 months old, caught in an illegal trap up near Bear Mountain. Her paw was mangled, infected. I spent 3 days nursing her back to health, bottle feeding her, teaching her to trust humans again. My wife Margaret helped. She named her Luna because of that crescent marking on her forehead. Billy's rifle lowered slightly as he processed this information. "That was you, the veterinarian who saved the cub. Mama read about it in the local paper. She said she was proud that you were helping innocent creatures, even if you couldn't help your own family." The irony was devastating. Linda had known about Tom's work at the preserve, had followed his career from afar, had even felt pride in his accomplishments while believing he had consciously rejected their son. How many times had their lives intersected without either of them knowing? Luna's body convulsed with another contraction, and Tom could see blood pooling more heavily beneath her. Time was running out for all of them. He made a decision that would either save 3 lives or cost him his own. "I'm going to help her now," Tom announced, dropping his hands and walking purposefully toward Luna. "If you're going to shoot me, Billy, then shoot me. But I won't stand here and watch her die when I have the skills to save her." "Stop right there!" Billy shouted, but his voice was more desperate than threatening now. Tom didn't stop. He knelt beside Luna's massive head, and she turned to look at him with eyes that held both pain and trust. Her recognition was unmistakable. Somehow, across 2 decades, she remembered the man who had saved her life as a cub. "Easy, girl," Tom murmured, his voice taking on the gentle tone he had always used with injured animals. "I'm here now. I'm going to help you bring your babies into the world." Luna's response was immediate and remarkable. Despite her agony, she shifted her body slightly to give Tom better access, her breathing becoming more controlled as if his presence alone provided comfort. It was a display of interspecies trust so profound that even Billy lowered his rifle completely, staring in amazement. Tom's hands moved with practiced efficiency, decades of veterinary experience guiding his movements. He could feel the cub's position, could sense the complication that was preventing natural birth. It would require manual repositioning, delicate work that could easily go wrong without proper instruments and sterile conditions. Billy, Tom called over his shoulder, never taking his attention from Luna. I need your help. She's going to need someone to support her head. Talk to her. Keep her calm while I work. I don't know anything about animals, Billy stammered. You don't need to know anything. You just need to care. And son, despite everything that's happened between us, despite all the pain and misunderstanding, I can see in your eyes that you care about life. That's something your mother gave you. A good heart. Billy stood frozen for a long moment, the rifle hanging loose in his hands. Tom continued working, his fingers carefully maneuvering the stuck cub while Luna panted and whimpered. The bear's trust in him was absolute, even as he caused her additional discomfort in service of saving her baby's life. She really never told you? Billy asked quietly, setting the rifle aside and approaching cautiously. Never, Tom replied, his voice strained with concentration. If I had known, everything would have been different. I would have found a way to stay, to be the father you deserved. Billy knelt at Luna's head, his hands trembling as he reached out to stroke her massive skull. To Tom's amazement, Luna accepted the touch immediately, as if she could sense the fundamental goodness in this troubled young man, despite his threatening behavior moments before. Mama always said animals were better judges of character than people, Billy whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Your mother was a wise woman, Tom replied, finally feeling the cub begin to move into proper position. She raised a son who's willing to help save a life, even when his world has been turned upside down. The first cub slipped free with a rush of fluid, tiny and perfect and utterly still. Tom's heart sank as he lifted the motionless form, but then training took over. He cleared the cub's mouth and nose, rubbed its chest vigorously, and breathed gently into its tiny nostrils. After what felt like an eternity, the cub gasped and began to cry, a sound so pure and full of life that both men felt tears streaming down their faces. My God, Billy breathed, wonder replacing the anger in his voice. It's really alive. Tom placed the cub near Luna's head, and she immediately began licking it with fierce maternal devotion. But there was no time to celebrate. He could feel another cub preparing to emerge, and Luna's strength was fading fast. The second cub emerged more easily, slipping into Tom's waiting hands with a healthy cry that echoed through the forest. Luna's maternal instincts kicked into overdrive as she began cleaning both babies with methodical devotion, her massive tongue gentle yet thorough. For a moment, the clearing filled with the sounds of new life, tiny mewls and Luna's soft rumbling purrs of contentment. But Tom's relief was short-lived. His experienced hands detected the telltale signs of a third cub still to come, and Luna's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The blood loss was becoming critical, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. She was dying, even as she tried to nurse the two cubs that had already survived. There's another one, Tom announced grimly, his hands already moving to assess the situation. She's too weak. I don't think she can make it through another delivery. Billy watched his father work with growing amazement and horror. The man he had hated for 27 years was risking everything to save a wild animal and her babies, showing more compassion in this single moment than Billy had witnessed in years of hard living. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How could someone capable of such tenderness have abandoned his own child? What can I do? Billy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom looked up, surprised by the offer of help. In Billy's eyes, he saw echoes of the little boy who had once waited by the window for a father who never came, mixed with the dawning realization that perhaps the story he had believed his entire life might not be the whole truth. Keep talking to her, Tom instructed. Animals respond to calm voices. Tell her she's doing great, that her babies need her to stay strong. Billy hesitated, then leaned closer to Luna's massive head. Hey, Mama Bear, he said softly, his voice cracking with emotion. You're the bravest thing I've ever seen. Your babies are beautiful. Perfect little fighters just like their mama." Luna's dark eyes focused on Billy with surprising clarity, and she made a low rumbling sound that somehow conveyed both pain and gratitude. Despite her agony, she seemed to understand that these humans were trying to help her. The third cub was Breach, its tiny hindquarters emerging first in a presentation that often proved fatal in the wild. Tom's hands worked frantically but carefully, trying to turn the cub without causing additional trauma to Luna's already compromised system. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October air. "Come on, little one," Tom muttered, his fingers working with surgical precision. "Don't give up on us now." Billy found himself praying, something he hadn't done since childhood, when his mother used to kneel with him beside his narrow bed and ask God to bring Daddy home. Now he was praying for the life of a bear cub and for the man he had planned to kill just minutes earlier. The sound of approaching vehicles broke through their intense focus. Car doors slammed, voices called out, and footsteps crashed through the underbrush. Billy grabbed for his rifle instinctively, but Tom's sharp voice stopped him. "Don't you dare pick up that gun," Tom commanded with an authority that brooked no argument. "Those are park rangers, probably visitors who called for help. If they see you armed, this situation becomes a lot more complicated." Billy's hand hovered over the rifle, 27 years of resentment warring with the growing realization that Tom Mitchell might actually be the man his mother had fallen in love with all those years ago, someone who protected the innocent and fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. "Tom! Tom, where are you?" A woman's voice carried through the trees, tinged with panic and urgency. "Over here," Tom called back, never taking his attention from the struggling cub. "Medical emergency!" 3 park rangers burst into the clearing, led by Janet Rodriguez, the preserve's head of operations. She took in the scene at a glance. Tom kneeling beside a laboring bear, a stranger crouched at the bear's head, 2 tiny cubs nursing weakly, and a hunting rifle lying in the grass. "Jesus Christ, Tom," Janet breathed. "What the hell is happening here?" "Luna's having complications," Tom explained tersely, finally feeling the third cub begin to turn into proper position. 3 cubs total. She's lost a lot of blood. We need to get a veterinary team out here immediately." One of the younger rangers reached for his radio, but Janet held up a hand to stop him. She had worked with Tom for 5 years and trusted his judgment implicitly, even in situations that defied standard protocol. "The nearest vet is Dr. Williams, and he's in Richmond until tomorrow," Janet said. "Tom, you know we can't authorize you to—" "Then don't authorize me," Tom interrupted, his voice steady despite the life-or-death struggle happening under his hands. "This is happening whether you authorize it or not." Billy watched the exchange with fascination. Here was his father, and the word no longer felt foreign in his mind, calmly defying official protocol to save a wild animal's life. The man who supposedly abandoned his family was risking legal consequences and professional censure for a creature who couldn't even thank him. The third cub slipped free suddenly, so small and still that Tom's heart nearly stopped. This one was clearly the runt, significantly smaller than its siblings and showing no signs of life. Tom immediately began the same resuscitation routine he had used on the first cub, clearing the airway, stimulating circulation, breathing gently into the tiny nostrils. "Is it—" Billy couldn't finish the question. Tom worked in focused silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, just when hope seemed lost, the tiny cub gasped and let out a weak but unmistakable cry. The sound was so beautiful that Janet Rodriguez actually applauded, tears streaming down her weathered face. Luna lifted her massive head with tremendous effort, surveying her 3 babies with obvious satisfaction. Despite her weakness, She began the instinctive process of cleaning the newest arrival, her maternal bonds overriding her physical exhaustion. "That's it, girl," Tom murmured, gently stroking Luna's neck. "3 healthy babies. You did it." But even as he spoke the encouraging words, Tom could see that Luna's strength was nearly spent. The blood loss had been severe, and her breathing was becoming increasingly labored. She had given everything to bring her cubs into the world, but the effort might have cost her own life. Billy saw it too, the way Luna's eyes were losing focus, the way her massive frame seemed to be deflating. After witnessing the miracle of birth, the prospect of watching this magnificent creature die felt unbearable. "She's not going to make it, is she?" Billy asked quietly. Tom's silence was answer enough. They had saved the cubs, but losing Luna would devastate the local ecosystem and break the heart of every person who had witnessed her courage and determination. As if sensing their despair, Luna made one final effort to lift her head. Her dark eyes found Tom's face, and in that gaze was a look of pure gratitude, recognition of his kindness both now and 20 years ago, acknowledgement that he had kept the promise he made to an injured cub so long ago. Then her eyes shifted to Billy, and something passed between the dying bear and the lost son, an understanding that transcended species, a recognition of shared pain and the possibility of redemption. Luna's breathing slowed, and her eyes began to drift closed. Luna's breathing stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the weak mewling of 3 orphaned cubs who would never know their mother's protection. Tom's hands trembled as he checked for a pulse, his fingers finding nothing but cooling flesh beneath Luna's thick fur. After everything they had accomplished, after the miracle of 3 successful births, they had lost her. Billy stared at Luna's still form with devastation etched across his weathered features. In the space of an hour, this magnificent creature had shown him more courage and determination than he had witnessed in years of hard living. She had trusted them completely, had allowed them to help her bring new life into the world, and now she was gone. "No," Billy whispered, his voice breaking like a child's. "This isn't how it ends. Not after everything she fought for." Tom knelt beside Luna's massive head, his own heart breaking for the second time in as many years. First Margaret, wasting away in a sterile hospital room, and now this, watching another female lose her battle with death despite his best efforts to save her. The weight of failure pressed down on him like a physical force. Janet Rodriguez and her team stood in stunned silence, cameras and cell phones forgotten in the face of such profound loss. The 3 cubs continued to cry weakly, already sensing their mother's absence, their tiny voices creating a heartbreaking chorus of abandonment. "We'll have to bottle feed them," Janet said quietly, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Round-the-clock care for the next several months. It's going to be—" She stopped mid-sentence as Tom suddenly pressed his ear to Luna's chest, his face intense with concentration. For a moment everyone held their breath, afraid to hope. "There," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. "So faint, I almost missed it." He immediately began chest compressions, his military medic training taking over with mechanical precision. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths, 30 more compressions. Luna's massive body moved with each push, but there was no response, no sign of returning consciousness. "Tom," Janet said gently, "she's been down for almost 5 minutes. Even if you get her back, there could be brain damage." "I don't care," Tom replied through gritted teeth, continuing his desperate rhythm. "She saved my life once 20 years ago. I'm not giving up on her." Billy watched his father's futile efforts with growing anguish. The man was pouring everything he had into saving a creature that was already gone, refusing to accept defeat even when logic demanded surrender. It was exactly the kind of stubborn determination that Billy had always imagined his father lacked, the willingness to fight impossible odds for someone he loved. "Let me help," Billy said suddenly, dropping to his knees beside Tom. "What do I do?" Tom looked up, surprised by the offer. "Take over compressions when I get tired. Don't stop for anything." They worked together in desperate synchronization, father and son united in their determination to cheat death one more time. Tom breathed life into Luna's massive lungs while Billy's powerful hands pumped her heart, their movements creating a rhythm of shared purpose that transcended their complicated history. Minutes passed. The park rangers watched in respectful silence, some recording the scene while others simply bore witness to the raw display of human compassion. The three cubs continued their plaintive crying, their voices growing weaker as exhaustion and hunger took their toll. "Tom," Janet whispered after nearly 10 minutes of futile resuscitation, "you've done everything you can. It's time to let her go." But Tom didn't stop. His own heart was racing, his breathing labored from exertion and emotion, but he refused to quit. This was Luna, the bear cub who had taught him that trust could exist between species, that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. He couldn't let her die without exhausting every possible option. Billy saw the desperation in his father's eyes and recognized it immediately. It was the same look he himself wore when sitting beside his mother's hospital bed, watching cancer consume the only person who had ever loved him unconditionally. The same helpless rage against mortality, the same refusal to accept the unacceptable. "Dad?" Billy said quietly, the word slipping out before he could stop it. "Dad, she's gone." Tom's hands stilled at the sound of that single life-changing word. For 27 years he had been nothing more than a bitter memory and an empty chair. Now, in this moment of shared grief, he was finally what he had always wanted to be, a father. Luna's cubs cried more desperately now, their tiny bodies growing cold in the October air. 3 orphaned lives that would need constant care if they were to survive. The magnitude of their responsibility was overwhelming, but Tom found strange comfort in the challenge ahead. "We need to get them to the clinic," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. "They'll need formula every 2 hours, temperature regulation, medical monitoring." Billy nodded, gently gathering the smallest cub in his large hands. "I'll help. However long it takes, whatever they need, I'll help." The promise hung between them like a bridge across 27 years of separation. The ambulance arrived just as Tom collapsed. The emotional and physical strain of the morning had pushed his 70-year-old body beyond its limits. Billy caught him as he fell, cradling his father's head while Janet Rodriguez barked orders into her radio. Tom's face was gray, his breathing shallow, and his pulse was erratic beneath Billy's trembling fingers. "Dad, stay with me," Billy pleaded, the word coming easier now, feeling more natural with each repetition. "You can't leave now. Not when we just found each other." The paramedics worked with professional efficiency, checking vital signs and preparing Tom for transport to Shenandoah Memorial Hospital. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Tom's eyes found Billy's with desperate urgency. "The cubs," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible over the medical equipment. "Promise me you'll take care of Luna's cubs." "I promise," Billy replied, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'll take care of them and I'll take care of you. We're family now." The ambulance doors slammed shut, leaving Billy alone with 3 orphaned bear cubs and a crowd of strangers who had witnessed the most transformative morning of his life. Janet Rodriguez approached cautiously, her experienced eyes assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. "We need to get these cubs to the rehabilitation facility immediately," she said gently. "They can't survive much longer without proper care." Billy nodded, carefully gathering the cubs in his jacket. They were so small, so fragile, their tiny bodies warm against his chest. As he walked toward Janet's truck, His mind raced with the implications of everything that had just happened. In the space of a few hours, he had discovered that his entire understanding of his life had been built on a foundation of lies and misunderstandings. At Shenandoah Memorial Hospital, the emergency room was a controlled chaos of medical professionals working to stabilize Tom's condition. Dr. Sarah Peterson, the attending cardiologist, emerged from the treatment room with cautious optimism written across her tired features. "He's had a significant cardiac episode," she explained to Billy, who had been pacing the waiting room for 3 hours. "The good news is that there's no evidence of a heart attack. The stress and exertion triggered an arrhythmia, but we've got it under control now." Billy felt relief wash over him like a physical wave. "Can I see him?" "He's sleeping, but yes. Fair warning, though, he's been asking for someone named Margaret, and he keeps talking about 3 bear cubs. The medication sometimes causes confusion." Billy's heart clenched. Margaret must have been Tom's wife, the woman who had helped name Luna all those years ago. Another piece of his father's life that he knew nothing about. Another relationship that had flourished while Billy grew up believing he was unwanted and forgotten. Tom looked impossibly frail in the hospital bed, dwarfed by the machines monitoring his vital signs. His weathered hands rested on the thin blanket, and Billy could see the calluses and scars that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and service to others. These were the hands that had saved Luna as a cub, that had delivered her babies, that had tried desperately to bring her back to life. "The cubs are safe," Billy whispered, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Janet has them at the rehabilitation center. They're taking formula every 2 hours, and they're gaining weight." Tom's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on his son's face. For a moment, confusion clouded his features, but then recognition dawned, followed by something that looked remarkably like peace. "Billy," Tom said softly. "You stayed." "I'm not going anywhere, Dad. We have 27 years to catch up on." Over the next few days, as Tom's condition stabilized, the truth slowly emerged in fragments of conversation and shared memories. Billy learned about his father's military service, about the chaos of mail delivery in Vietnam, about the woman named Margaret who had loved Tom for 43 years and had died believing her husband had no other children. Tom, in turn, learned about Linda Morrison's struggle to raise a child alone, about Billy's bitter childhood marked by poverty and the constant ache of abandonment, about the woman who had died still loving the man who had unknowingly broken her heart. The most devastating revelation came when Billy produced a shoebox filled with letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age and never sent. Linda had written to Tom religiously for the first 5 years after his deployment, pouring her heart onto paper that she never had the courage to mail. She had convinced herself that his silence meant rejection, never knowing that he had never received her original letters announcing the pregnancy. "She wrote to you every week," Billy said, his voice thick with emotion as he handed Tom one of the letters. "Even after she married Jim Morrison and he adopted me, she still wrote to you. She just never sent them." Tom read his first letter from Linda Morrison with tears streaming down his face. It was dated 3 months after his deployment, written in the careful script of a young woman trying to be brave. "Dear Tommy, I hope this letter finds you safe. I have something wonderful to tell you. We're going to have a baby. I know the timing isn't perfect with you overseas, but I believe that love always finds a way. Our little one is due in March, and I pray every night that you'll be home to meet him or her." The letter went on for 3 pages, filled with plans and dreams and absolute faith that Tom would want to be part of their child's life. Reading it felt like looking through a window into a life he should have lived. A happiness he had been denied by circumstance and bureaucratic failure. "She loved you until the day she died," Billy said quietly. "Even when she was angry, even when she felt abandoned, she never stopped loving you." 6 months later, Tom Mitchell stood in the afternoon sunshine outside his daughter's home in San Diego, holding his newborn grandson for the first time. Thomas Mitchell Rodriguez Jr. was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and the unmistakable Mitchell chin that had marked 3 generations of stubborn, loving men. "He looks just like you did as a baby," Sarah whispered, her eyes bright with tears of joy and reconciliation. "I found the old photo albums after I saw you on the news with Luna. I couldn't believe I had let pride keep us apart for so long." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of healing, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Tom's cancer, miraculously, had gone into complete remission, a development that his oncologist attributed to reduced stress and renewed purpose, though Tom suspected that love itself might be the most powerful medicine of all. Billy had moved to Virginia to be closer to his father, taking a job at the Shenandoah Wildlife Preserve and enrolling in veterinary courses at the local community college. At 44, he was starting the career he should have begun decades earlier, guided by the father he had thought abandoned him. "Remember what Grandma Margaret always said?" Tom told his grandson, his voice soft with wonder. "Animals understand grief better than people, but people understand love better than anything else in creation." The 3 bear cubs, Hope, Faith, and Courage, as they had been named by the thousands of people who followed their story online, were thriving under Billy's dedicated care. They had grown from tiny, helpless creatures into rambunctious young bears who recognized Billy's voice and came running whenever he entered their enclosure. The story of their rescue had captured hearts around the world, generating over $2 million in donations for wildlife preservation. But more importantly, it had brought together a scattered family and healed wounds that had festered for nearly 3 decades. Sarah wiped away tears as she watched her father and son together. "I owe you an apology, Dad. When Mom was dying, I blamed you for not being there enough, but the truth is, I was the one who couldn't handle watching her slip away. You never left her side, and I was too much of a coward to stay." Tom shifted baby Thomas to one arm and pulled his daughter close with the other. "We all grieve differently, sweetheart. Your mother understood that. She never blamed you for protecting yourself the only way you knew how." Through the sliding glass door, they could see Miguel playing in the backyard with Emma, now 7 years old and absolutely fascinated by her grandfather's stories about bears and wildlife rescue. Billy sat at the patio table, carefully bottle-feeding the smallest of Luna's cubs who had required extended care due to complications from her difficult birth. The cub, Courage, had become particularly attached to Billy, often falling asleep in his arms during feeding times. Wildlife experts said it was simple imprinting, but Tom knew better. He had seen the same connection between Luna and himself all those years ago, a bond that transcended species and spoke to something deeper than mere survival instinct. "Dr. Williams thinks Courage might never be suitable for release into the wild," Billy said, looking up as Tom and Sarah approached. "She's too socialized to humans, too dependent on us for comfort and security." Tom nodded thoughtfully. This was always the challenge with wildlife rehabilitation, balancing the desire to help with the need to preserve wild behavior. But looking at the peaceful cub in Billy's arms, he wondered if perhaps this was exactly where Courage belonged. "Luna trusted us with her most precious gifts," Tom said quietly. "Maybe Courage is meant to stay with us to help teach other people about the bond between humans and wildlife." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as the extended family gathered for dinner, 4 generations represented in one room for the first time. Emma chattered excitedly about her upcoming visit to Virginia to see the bear cubs, while baby Thomas slept peacefully in his grandfather's arms. Sarah had prepared Tom's favorite meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same recipe Margaret had used for 40 years. As they sat around the table, Billy offered to say grace, something he hadn't done since his mother's death. Dear Lord, Billy began, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. We thank you for bringing our family together through tragedy and joy alike. We thank you for the gift of new life, both human and bear, and for the reminder that love always finds a way home, even when the path seems impossible. He paused, looking around the table at the faces that had become so dear to him in such a short time. We thank you for Luna's courage and sacrifice, for her trust in strangers who became family. And we ask for your blessing on hope, faith, and courage as they grow strong and healthy in your creation. Amen, the family chorused together, and Tom felt a peace he hadn't experienced since Margaret's death. After dinner, as the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, Tom sat on the back porch with baby Thomas while the rest of the family cleaned up inside. The infant was awake now, staring up at his grandfather with the solemn intensity that only newborns possess. Your great-grandmother Margaret would have loved you so much, Tom whispered. She always said that every child born is proof that God still believes in tomorrow. You're our proof, little one. Proof that families can heal, that love can bridge any gap, that second chances are real. Billy joined him on the porch, carrying Courage in a small travel carrier. The cub was nearly 4 months old now, no longer the tiny creature they had helped deliver in Luna's den, but still small enough to curl up in Billy's lap like a contented house cat. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, Billy mentioned, settling into the chair beside his father. About Courage maybe being meant to stay with us. Tom nodded, gently rocking baby Thomas. Sometimes the wildest thing we can do for a wild animal is let them teach us how to be more human. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her husband Miguel beside her. Dad, Billy, we've been talking. Miguel's gotten approval to transfer to the Norfolk office. We're moving back to Virginia. Tom's face lit up with surprise and joy. Sarah, you don't have to, Yes, I do, she interrupted gently. I've missed too much of your life already, and I want Thomas to grow up knowing his grandfather and uncle. I want Emma to learn about wildlife conservation from the best teacher in the world. As if understanding the significance of the moment, baby Thomas chose that instant to smile for the first time. A genuine, heartwarming grin that seemed to encompass all the love and hope of their reunited family. Billy reached over to touch his nephew's tiny hand, and Courage stirred in her carrier, making the soft rumbling sound that was her version of a purr. 3 generations of Mitchell men, bound together by love and loss, and the miracle of second chances. Luna would be proud, Tom said softly, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Her cubs are safe. Her legacy lives on, and somehow, through saving her babies, we managed to save ourselves. In the distance, the ocean waves whispered against the shore, carrying with them the eternal promise of tides that always return home. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we think all hope is lost. Tom Mitchell, a 67-year-old widower living on Social Security, thought his story was ending. Terminal cancer, estranged daughter, and a son he never knew existed who wanted him dead. But in helping a struggling mother give birth, Tom discovered that love truly does find a way home, even after decades of heartbreak. His son Billy, raised believing his father had abandoned him, learned that sometimes our deepest wounds are built on misunderstandings that time can heal. Sarah, Tom's daughter, realized that pride had stolen precious years from their relationship. Through the miracle of new life, both human and bear, 3 generations found their way back to each other. Tom's cancer went into remission. Billy found his calling in wildlife care, and baby Thomas Jr. became the bridge that connected their fractured family. Luna's cubs taught them that trust transcends species, that courage comes in the smallest packages, and that every ending can become a new beginning. As Tom holds his grandson while watching Luna's cubs play, he knows Margaret was right. Love always finds a way home. No matter how broken your family feels, it's never too late for second chances. What family relationship do you wish you could heal? Have you ever experienced an unexpected second chance that changed your life?